She lay near the trash pile, still and silent, like a broken doll left to rot under the twin suns. Her skin was dry and cracked, her hair full of dust, and her lips barely moved. Flies swarmed around her eyes, her arms, her mouth, buzzing like they owned her, but she didn't move. She had no more strength left. She was an alien widow. Her husband had died in the last raid. Since then, her tribe had called her cursed. They threw her out, told her to die quietly far from the village. They gave her no food, no water, no goodbye, only a shove in silence. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the flies had become her only company. They landed on her open wounds, crawled into her ears. She didn't even swat them away anymore. There was no point. No one cared. No one would ever come for her. Not on this dead planet. But then, crunch. Footsteps. On the dry dirt, she didn't lift her head. Maybe it was a wild animal, maybe a scavenger come to pick her clean. Didn't matter. The steps came closer, then stopped. A voice spoke. Deep, gentle, not her language. The human knelt beside her. He looked young, maybe 30, with sunburnt skin and kind brown eyes. His clothes were dirty, worn from travel, but he had a small backpack. He opened it, looked inside, then looked at her again. He frowned at the flies. He waved them away gently as if not to scare her. Then he reached into his bag. She opened her eyes, just a little, just enough to see something she had only dreamed of. Food, a soft piece of bread wrapped in cloth, a small fruit red and round, water in a metal flask. She blinked, not believing. Was this a dream, or was she already dead? The human pulled off a piece of the bread and brought it to her lips. She couldn't lift her hand, so he fed her like a child. Slowly, carefully, letting her chew one bite at a time. He poured a few drops of water into her mouth, then more and more until her throat no longer burned. The flies buzzed, annoyed, but he kept waving them off. He didn't care that she was filthy. He didn't care that she smelled like death. He only cared that she was alive. She looked at him. Eyes, red vision blurry. "Why?" she whispered in her own language. Her voice cracked, almost too weak to hear. He didn't understand, but he smiled, a tired but warm smile, and said in his human tongue, "No one should die alone." She didn't know the words, but she understood the meaning. Tears rolled down her cheeks, carving clean lines in the dust on her face. No one had spoken kindly to her since her husband died. No one had looked at her like she mattered, and now this human, a stranger, had given her his last meal. He didn't eat a single bite himself. Just sat there, legs crossed, watching her eat what little he had. The suns began to set. The desert wind grew cold. The human stood up and looked around. He pulled a thin blanket from his pack and covered her body. Then he sat beside her, leaning against a rock, eyes half closed, arms still swatting flies away from her face. She watched him through tired eyes. He looked like someone who had also known hunger, like someone who had no home, no riches, just kindness. She wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached out, just a little, just enough for her finger to touch his hand. He looked down, surprised, then held her hand gently. Not like she was broken, but like she was someone worth saving. That night, as the stars filled the sky and cold wrapped around them like a shroud, the flies finally left. And for the first time in days, the widow slept, with warmth in her belly and hope in her heart, because someone, a human, had seen her and decided she was still worth saving. The next morning, the alien widow opened her eyes slowly. She was still weak, but something had changed. The flies were gone, and she wasn't cold anymore. She moved her fingers first, then her arms. The thin blanket the human had given her was still wrapped around her, soft and warm, though full of holes. She looked to her left. The human was still there, sitting with his back against a large stone. His eyes were closed, mouth slightly open. His face looked tired, more tired than before. His body was shivering in the early morning wind. He had no blanket left for himself. She stared at him, confused. Why would Someone give up everything for a stranger? She was no one. Not even her own people wanted her. Yet this human had shared his water, his food, even his warmth. A sound came from his stomach, a soft growl. He hadn't eaten. Not a single bite from the meal he gave her. The truth hit her, like a slap. That was his only meal. He gave it away, fully, without thinking twice. Tears welled in her eyes again. But this time, not from pain. From something else. Something new. Gratitude. She tried to sit up, her arms trembling. He woke up as she moved, blinking in surprise. "Hey, you're awake," he said softly, his voice cracking. She couldn't understand the words, but his tone felt like a warm light on her skin. She pointed to his bag, then shook her head slowly. "No food," she whispered in her broken voice. Her language was alien to him, but he understood the gesture. He smiled and nodded, trying to act strong, but she saw it. His lips were pale, his hands shaky. He was hungry. She looked around. There was nothing in the sand but rocks, dust, and bones. No plants, no fruit, no water stream. This was a dead zone. He noticed her looking and pulled something from his pocket. It was a tiny piece of dried meat. Barely. Enough for even a child. She thought he would eat it. Instead, he tore it in half and gave one piece to her. She pushed it back toward him, weakly shaking her head. He laughed, not mocking, but gentle, and placed it in her hand anyway. Then he ate his piece, chewing slowly like it was the finest meal in the galaxy. She took a bite. It was salty. Hard to chew, but it was food. She hadn't eaten like this since before her husband died. She felt stronger, not from the food, but from the fact that someone finally cared if she lived. As they sat in silence, the sun rose higher, burning the dry air around them. He stood up and stretched, his joints cracking. Then he looked at her, then to the horizon. Far away, heat shimmered in the distance. He picked up his bag and made a gesture, fingers walking across his palm. She understood. "We go." She shook her head. She couldn't walk, but he didn't seem surprised. He crouched beside her and lifted her gently, his arms trembling under her. Wait. She wasn't heavy, but he was weak. Still, he carried her like she was made of glass, step by step. He moved, boots crunching in the dust. She rested her head against his chest, hearing his heart beat slow and tired. Every few minutes, he stopped to breathe, but he never dropped her, not once. She whispered, "Why?" Again, the only word she could say. He looked down at her, sweat dripping from his forehead, and though she didn't understand the words, she felt the meaning as he replied softly, "You looked like someone worth saving." They walked until the twin suns reached the middle of the sky, and then, finally, he found a shadow under a half-buried metal wreck. Old, rusty, probably a crashed shuttle from long ago. He laid her down gently, his arms shaking now more than ever. Then he collapsed. Beside her, his breathing was heavy, shallow, but he still smiled at her. She looked at him carefully. This man had nothing. No food, no power, no reason to help. But his heart was stronger than any warrior's. She touched his hand, then placed the last crumb of meat into his palm. He blinked, surprised but didn't argue. He ate it slowly, like it was a treasure. She watched him rest. Her chest no longer felt empty. She didn't feel cursed anymore. That small meal, the one meant for one, had become something greater. It had saved them both, not just from hunger, but from the loneliness they had carried. Far too long. The sky turned pale yellow as noon passed. Heat waves danced over the dry ground. The widow rested under the broken metal wreck, her eyes half closed. The human sat beside her, breathing slow. He had given her food, water, and his only blanket. But now he had nothing left for himself. Still, he didn't complain. Not once. He looked at the horizon. Wide, empty, lifeless. If they stayed too long, the heat would steal their breath. If they moved too late, the night wind would freeze their bones. They had to go somewhere, anywhere. As long as it wasn't here. She tried to move her legs again, tried to sit up on her own, but her body wouldn't listen. Too much hunger, too much pain, too many days in the dirt. Her hands trembled as she looked at him. She felt like a burden, but the human didn't think so. He gave her a smile, tired but calm. Then he stood up, stretched his sore back, and bent down. Without a word, he lifted her in his arms again. She was silent, shocked at first. Then she whispered, "You'll break." He didn't understand her words, but he understood her eyes, and he shook his head slowly. "I won't drop you," he said in English. Even though his arms were already shaking, the dust rose around them as he walked, each step heavy, slow, painful, but he didn't stop. He carried her like a promise, like she mattered, like she was still worth something. They passed old machines, burned ships, and bones buried in the sand. Every now and then he would stop to catch his breath, but even then he held her close. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and tired. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His lips were dry, cracked like hers had been. Still, he didn't ask her for anything. No help, no thanks, no explanation, only silence, only kindness. She didn't even know his name. He didn't know hers, but somehow, it didn't matter. The silence between them was not cold. It was warm. It was trust later. They reached a canyon path, rocks high on both sides, cooler air, some shade, a place safer than the open desert. He set her down gently against a rock, then dropped to his knees, breathing hard. His arms were red from the sun, his back sore from the weight, but he didn't complain, not even once. She looked at him, really looked at him, and noticed something for the first time. He had a limp. One leg didn't bend right. Each step must have hurt him badly. Still, he had carried her through the dust. She felt a deep pain in her chest, not physical but heavy, like guilt. No one had ever done this for her. Not even her own kind, not even her late husband had held her this way when she was sick. The human pulled out a small bottle from his bag, only a few drops of water left. He gave them to her without thinking. She took them, but then pushed the bottle back. "No," she whispered and pointed to him. He shook his head, smiling. "You need it more," he said softly. And with that he sat back and leaned against the wall of stone, eyes closing slowly, his body begging for rest. She stared at the bottle in her hand, then at the man who saved her, and she knew. This was not just kindness. This was something rare, something sacred. She scooted closer, covering him with the thin blanket. It barely helped, but it was all they had. She placed her hand over his. For the first time, she gave comfort back. That night, they didn't speak. They just watched the sky change. The stars came slowly, one by one. The desert wind began to howl between the rocks, but they stayed close, sharing warmth, sharing breath. He was a stranger, a wanderer, yet he had become her shelter, and though her legs were weak, her heart was beginning to walk again. She made a silent promise to herself. If she ever got strong again, she would protect him, just like he had protected her. For now, though, she would let him rest, and she would remember the way he carried her, not because he had to, but because he chose to. The canyon air was dry, but cooler than the burning, open desert. The human woke first, rubbing his eyes as the early light touched the stone walls. He looked at the alien widow beside him, still asleep, breathing slow but steady. She had survived another night that gave him strength. He checked his bag, still empty, no food, no water, no tools, no credits, nothing but an old blanket. One broken knife and a half-charged flare stick, and yet somehow he smiled. He didn't come from a rich world. He wasn't a soldier, a hero, or a healer. He was just a human drifter, moving from place to place, looking for small jobs, picking up scraps, trading old junk for bits of bread. He didn't own much, never did. But his mother once told him, "Even if you have nothing, you can still be kind." Those words had stayed with him. Now they lived in his actions. The widow stirred, her eyes opening slowly. He leaned forward, offered her the last drop of water he had saved. She accepted, but this time she didn't drink all of it. She took a sip and gave the rest back to him. He looked surprised, then nodded with a soft smile. Something was changing between them. She still didn't know his name, and he still didn't know hers, but they had already shared more than most friends ever did. He helped her stand that morning. Her legs wobbled like branches in the wind, but she stood. For the first time in many days, he didn't cheer or clap. He just offered his arm to hold. Simple, steady support. They walked slowly through the canyon path, the human limping on his bad leg, the widow leaning on him. One step at a time, rocks shifted beneath their feet. Sand blew across their faces, but they kept going. As they moved, they passed ruins, old outposts from some forgotten war, metal beams rusted into the earth, signs written in languages long lost. They found a broken panel, solar-powered, blinking weakly. The human smiled and tapped it twice, then placed his flare stick in the charging slot. Even in ruins, he saw hope. The widow watched him work. His fingers were quick but careful. He wasn't a warrior, but he had skills. Survival wasn't just about strength. It was about heart. Later that day, they reached a small trade camp at the edge of the rocks. Just 3 tents, a water barrel, and a few tired merchants resting near a broken generator. The human waved to them. "Peace," he said in 3 languages, hoping one would be understood. One of the merchants stood, short, with green scales and sharp yellow eyes. He looked the human up and down, then stared at the widow. "Why is she with you?" he hissed. "She's one of the cursed widows." The other merchants turned away, muttering, "She should be dead." One spat. "She brings sickness," said another. The human stood firm. "She's alive," he said calmly. "She's my friend." Laughter erupted from the group. "A human defending a cursed widow? You've lost your mind. Leave her and we'll share our food with you." The human's jaw tightened. He looked at the widow, who was now hiding behind him, her head low. He took a deep breath, then turned back to them. "Then I eat nothing," he said, "and we move on." He reached into his pocket and placed his only item of value, a solar battery, on the table. "I'll trade this for water and a place to rest, for both of us." The lead merchant looked at it, then at the man. After a long pause, he sighed, "Fine, one night. But keep her away from our food." The human nodded, not angry, not afraid. He just picked up the water jug and guided the widow to a shaded corner. There, he poured water into her hands so she could drink. She looked at him, tears shining again. He had nothing, yet he still gave, still protected her. That night, as the campfire burned low and the stars shone above, the widow whispered a word, a name. Her name. Jara. He looked at her, surprised. Then he smiled and placed his hand on his chest. "Cal," he said. "Human." "Cal." Jara repeated it softly. "Cal." Like it was a sacred word, because to her it was. She had been thrown away by her people, forgotten by the world. But this man, this human with nothing, had given her more than food or water. He had given her dignity. He had shown her that even broken souls can still care, still protect, still love, and though he had nothing, he had already given her everything. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Jara sat beside the camp's outer fence, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of thin soup. It wasn't much, but it was the first real meal she'd had in many cycles. The sun was still low, casting soft golden light over the sand and broken metal. Cal was sleeping inside the tent, finally getting rest after days of carrying her. She looked at him now, his face calm, chest rising and falling. He had risked everything for her, traded his last items, stood up to the merchants, and never once asked her for anything. She didn't understand this kind of kindness, but she wanted to. She wanted to be strong again. For him. Suddenly, a sharp buzz cut through the silence. Jara's ears twitched. In the distance, engines roared, kicking. up sand and dust as a sleek transport glider approached the camp. It bore the colors of her old tribe. Her blood turned cold. They had come. 3 armored aliens stepped down, tall and strong, dressed in bone-plated gear. Their leader had cruel eyes and a long scar across his face. Jara recognized him instantly. Her cousin by marriage. He was, the one who had ordered her thrown out. He had called her dead weight and told her to die quietly. Now he was back and he wasn't smiling. "Where is she?" he barked at the merchant leader. "The cursed widow." The merchant hesitated. "She's here," he muttered. "Your kind abandoned her. She should have died days ago." The tribal soldier spat on the ground. "She was supposed to, but she survived. That brings shame to the elders. We must finish what we started." Jara froze, her fingers gripping the soup cup. Her body wanted to run, but her heart wouldn't move. It was happening again. They would. Drag her away, leave her broken in the sand, and this time, Cal wouldn't survive trying to stop them. She stood up quietly, moving back toward the tent. But it was too late. They had seen her. "There," the scarred leader shouted. "She hides like a coward, even after being given a second chance to die with dignity." Cal stepped out of the tent at the sound, eyes still sleepy. But when he saw Zara's face, pale, shaking, he knew. He looked toward the approaching warriors, then looked at her, and didn't hesitate. He walked forward and placed himself between her and them. No armor, no weapon, only resolve in his tired body. "She stays with me," he said firmly. "She's not going anywhere," the alien warriors laughed. "A human defends her now? She is dirt and you are nothing." Cal's jaw tightened. "Funny," he said quietly. "She's the only person I've met worth protecting." The scarred one stepped closer. "You'll move, or we'll remove you." Cal didn't move. He bent down and picked up a broken metal pipe from beside the tent. It was bent, rusted, barely a weapon, but in his hand it became a line in the sand. A message. "You'll go through me first." Jara watched in horror. She had nothing. No strength. No speed, no weapon, only fear for Cal. But then something else rose inside her. Not fear, anger, not weakness, fire. She was done running, done being called cursed, worthless, forgotten. She stepped forward beside Cal, not behind him. Beside him, the scarred leader raised his weapon. Jara lifted her voice, a word from the old tongue, a command of her ancestors. "Enough!" The guards paused. That word. It was ancient, sacred, rarely used except by matriarchs or spiritual leaders. "I am still of the bloodline," she said, her voice trembling but loud. "You left me to die, but I lived. Your shame is not mine. It is yours?" The soldiers hesitated. Even the scarred leader blinked, unsure. Jara stepped in front of Cal, holding up her empty hands. "You will not touch this human. He fed me when you let me starve. He carried me when you left me in the dirt. He gave me life, and you gave me death." Silence filled the camp. No one spoke. Even the merchant stood still, watching. Then slowly the scarred leader lowered his weapon. "Keep your cursed life," he spat, "and die with this fool if you want." They turned and walked away. No fight, no blood, only silence, only defeat, but to Jara it wasn't defeat. It was victory. She had stood, she had spoken. She had protected someone else just like he had protected her. Cal looked at her, a proud smile on his face. "You didn't need me that time," he said quietly. She turned to him. "No," she whispered, "but I still want you beside me." And, as the wind blew the dust away, 2 people who had nothing now had each other. Jara sat by the fire, her fingers slowly rubbing the smooth stone Cal had given her earlier. It wasn't special, not gold, not rare, just something he found in the canyon and thought was pretty like her. That made it more precious than anything she had ever owned. The camp was quiet again. The merchant tents had been taken down. The wind was gentle for once, but Jara's heart was not still. She kept thinking of the moment her people left, how they had turned their backs again. But this time, it didn't break her because she had stood. She had protected someone, she had spoken without shaking, and Cal had smiled at her like she was made of light. Not dirt, not curse, but strength. Still, her thoughts were uneasy. Cal had grown weaker since the last walk. He had coughed during the night, trying to hide it from her. He was losing energy, too. Little food, too little water, and too much given away. Jara couldn't sit and watch anymore. She had rested long enough. Her body still ached. Her legs still felt like sticks, but she stood slowly, painfully. She pushed herself up. She wobbled, caught her balance, and took a step. Then another, and another. Cal was still asleep under the shade. She didn't wake him. This time, she would bring something back. The desert path was long and cruel, but she remembered the direction from where they had come. She remembered the dry tree, the broken metal pod, the half-buried crate, and after what felt like hours, she found it, a supply cache, half covered in sand, forgotten by travelers. Inside, sealed rations, a full water pack, and some old dried fruit. Not much, but for them, it was a treasure. She fell to her knees, laughing and crying at the same time. Her hands shook as she opened the pack and took a small bite. Then she filled a pouch with water, grabbed everything she could carry, and began the long walk back. Cal opened his eyes just before sunset. The fire was still burning, but Jara was gone. Panic hit him like a knife. He struggled to sit, his head dizzy, heart racing, then footsteps. He turned his head. Jara was coming down the path, her arms full, her smile wide, her eyes shining with victory. She dropped the supplies beside him and handed him a fruit. "Eat," she said, her voice firm. He stared at her, stunned. "You walked all that way?" She nodded. "I had to," she said simply. "You carried me. Now I carry us." He took the fruit slowly, bit into it. His body relaxed as the sweet taste hit his tongue. He closed his eyes. "Best thing I've ever eaten," he whispered, and Jara laughed, her laugh soft and real, like the sound of wind through flowers. That night, they sat by the fire together. She told him stories in her broken words, about her village, about her husband, about how they used to sing songs under the red moons. He listened quietly, never interrupting. Then he shared too. About Earth, about oceans she had never seen, about how his father had died when he was young, how his mother taught him to be kind even when the world wasn't, about how he had been alone for years, until he found her. She blinked. "You were lonely too?" He nodded. "All the time." She touched his hand gently. Now they weren't alone anymore. The next morning, everything changed. A sandstorm hit before sunrise. Fast and violent, they packed quickly, but the storm cut visibility to nothing. Wind howled like beasts, tearing tents, throwing sand in their eyes. They ran for cover into the canyon again, deeper this time, but they weren't the only ones there. A wild desert beast, long, with black scales and yellow fangs, emerged from the dust, drawn by the scent of food, or fear, or both. It hissed, eyes glowing, claws digging into the rock. Jara froze. Old fear returned, cold and sharp. But Cal stepped forward without thinking. He raised the same broken pipe he had used before, hands trembling but eyes steady. "Run," he said. Jara didn't move. Not this time. Not again. Instead, she grabbed a stone from the ground, sharp and jagged, and stood beside him. Her voice rose in her old warrior tongue, a battle cry passed down by her grandmothers. She screamed into the storm, loud and proud. The beast hesitated, two figures standing tall, united. The scent of courage mixed with sand and fire. Then Jara threw the stone, hit the creature in its eye. It roared and turned, retreating into the dust, defeated not by strength but by will. As the wind died and silence returned, Cal dropped to his knees, breathless. Jara fell beside him, laughing through her tears. They had survived, together. That was the day she stood not just with her legs, but with her soul. No longer the weak widow in the dirt, no longer the broken one. She was something more now, and so was he. They looked at each other under the clear morning sky, two wanderers with nothing but each other, and for the first time, that was enough. The storm had passed, the skies were clean again, soft blue stretching far and wide. And in the middle of that quiet canyon, two figures sat beside a dying fire, a human with tired eyes and an alien widow with steady hands. But Jara was not weak anymore, and Cal was not alone anymore. They had survived hunger, dust, shame, and even monsters, not with weapons or power, but with kindness, courage, and quiet care. Now, it was time to build something new, even if it started small. That morning, Jara went out alone. She no longer needed to hide behind Cal. Her legs were steady, her back straight. She searched the rocks, the trees, the broken scraps of old machines, and found what she needed: a few edible roots, a tiny patch of salt moss, and something even rarer, a bush with purple seed pods that smelled like honey. Her people used to call it hope vine. They believed it only grew near places where hearts could heal. She smiled, her fingers brushing the soft leaves. Then she gathered what she could and returned to camp. Cal looked up as she arrived. He was cooking a small piece of ration bread over the flame, barely enough for one. But he smiled as she walked. "You're getting faster," he said, teasing. She rolled her eyes playfully, then she showed him what she had found. His eyes widened like a child. "You did all that alone?" She nodded, then gently took the bread from his hand and placed it aside. "No," she said. "Today we eat my food." She crushed the roots with a flat stone, mixing them with warm water. She sprinkled salt moss, crushed the pods into syrup. The fire hissed as she boiled it all in a cracked bowl. Cal watched in silence, eyes soft. She worked with care, every movement precise, like someone honoring a memory. And she was, because long ago her husband had made her a soup like this. Now, she was making it for someone who had saved her soul. When the soup was done, Jara placed the bowl in Cal's hands. He stared at it like it was gold. The scent was sweet, earthy, and warm. He took one sip, and his eyes closed. "Jara," he whispered, "this is the best thing I've ever tasted." She smiled and sat beside him. They shared the meal, spoon by spoon. And for the first time in days, maybe years, Cal's hand stopped shaking. When they finished, he placed the empty bowl beside the fire, then turned to her with quiet eyes. "You gave me your first gift," he said, "and I almost forgot how it feels to be cared for." Jara reached out and gently held his hand. "No," she whispered. "You reminded me how to live." Later that night, as the stars lit up the canyon above, Cal unwrapped a small bundle. He'd kept hidden in his pack. Inside was a metal tag, dull, bent, but still readable. It had his name and a scratched-out military number. "I used to be part of something," he said softly. "A rescue crew, long ago. We were ambushed. I survived, but I stopped believing I mattered after that. I walked planet to planet doing odd jobs, never staying long." Jara listened, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "But then," he continued, "I found you." He handed her the tag. "Now, I don't feel lost anymore." Jara pressed the tag to her chest, then slowly removed the small shell necklace she wore, the only thing she had saved from her old life. She placed it around his neck. "Now you carry a part of me," she said. "No more running, Cal, not for you, not for me." Days passed. They stayed near the canyon, gathering food, trading with travelers. Jara became stronger, her eyes brighter, her laugh fuller. Cal's limp faded as his health returned. People began to visit their camp, not to mock, but to learn. "How did you survive the storm? Are you two together? What do you feed each other? You both look like fighters." They never called Jara cursed again. Now they called her Firewalker, and Cal was known as the giver who had nothing. But names didn't matter to them anymore. What mattered was simple. One day, long ago, a human had given his last meal to a forgotten widow, not knowing if she would live, and now she gave him her first gift. Not just a meal, but her heart, her hope, her future. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars shimmered above, Jara rested her head on Cal's shoulder and whispered, "We have nothing." Cal smiled. "Except everything that matters." They had no empire, no riches, no home with walls. But they had each other, and in the dust of a broken world, that was more than enough.